Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you might happen to be, and whether you're watching live or archived. And welcome to another in the Nautel Transmission Talk Tuesday webinar series. I'm your host, Jeff Welton, and we're going to have some fun today, talking about how technology has changed our lives. Well, that's easy. 31 years ago when I started at Nautel, I wouldn't have been able to do this. Not sure if that's a good thing or a bad thing, but it's definitely a change. Got some interesting guests today, so I'm not going to waste a whole lot of time with me blathering on about things. With us today, of course, as they are in the order on your screen, we've got Matt Herdon, who's one of our product managers, works in marketing, all-around good guy, and has an awesome accent. So we love to have Matt along. Matt, welcome, and thanks for being here.
Thanks a lot. Happy to be here.
And of course, Matt's also the guy on the AUI, so don't feel free or don't be embarrassed about pinging him on that. Also, with me, we've got Jim Gray, the managing partner for Optimized Media Group. Jim is also involved with St. Cloud State. Let's see if I get this right. St. Cloud State Radio and Television. Do you work with the TV side too, Jim?
Radio with pictures, it'll never work. Nah.
There you go. There you go. But so you handle most of the radio technical side, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I'm the director of operations for the facility here at SCSU, where we have actually 7 different stations that we push out from this space as well. And I'm an adjunct professor within the mass communications department here as well.
And you've got a wife and several beautiful children, and
Last
I have no idea.
I'm so busy. They might still be there. Yeah, no,
Yeah.
my family's actually very supportive of all the activities that I do here. So
it's like my wife said, she looked at me the other day, she goes, "You going to be on the road again soon?" And I go, "I'm glad you're so supportive." And she goes, "I just need the quiet time." All right, so the mandatory housekeeping stuff. Let me get over to the control button for the slide deck. We've got a lot of folks here, and some of the names that I don't recognize from before. So if you're new to us, all means there is in your little control dashboard the ability to ask questions. Type them in there. Good morning, Mark Forrest. He's already found the question window. Absolutely. Type questions. We try to hit everything. If for any reason we don't, then we'll bring it up at the tail end with an follow-up email. If you've got a microphone and you're not bashful at all, then hit the little hand wavy icon. We're not above opening your mic and making you part of the conversation. Beyond that, if you're an SBE member, these webinars do qualify as under the recertification schedule, category I believe, for half of a recert credit. So if you're an SBE member, then keep track of that with whatever form you use for updating your certification stuff. If you're not an SBE member, get on it, would you? We're in a membership drive now. Tell them Jeff sent you. There you go. Let's see. Yeah, Alex Hartman mentions that Jim's taken over his office. So we were joking about this earlier. And I don't know whether it's politically correct now, but many, many years ago, when I first met these reprobates, there was a bucket of cigarette butts in the back, and I was a smoker at the time, and that was the unofficial smoking section on the shores of the Mississippi River. So blame Alex for contributing to my any potential health issues I may or may not have at this point. All right, so talking about technology. When I started at Nautel in 1990, our network consisted of a 8086 and an 8088, 2 Intel computers, PCs, that were connected with a piece of coax running Lantastic. Things have changed a little bit in that length of time. We got new ways of monitoring stuff. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about drones and some of their applications, and that's Jim comes in there as well, because so Jim, you do a lot of stuff with drones for the university as well.
Yeah, I'm the official drone flight coordinator for the university, just making sure that all the activities that are done safely and with appropriate equipment, and they've got safety plans and everything's done right. I'm also involved with NCAT, which is the National Center for Autonomous Technologies, which is actually centered at St. Cloud State University. And I work with them on some of their projects as well. It's an interesting group. They're really trying to forward the idea of using autonomous technologies like drones, but not exclusively to drones in the air, but other autonomous technologies to help forward people in different STEM-based careers and ways of applying that technology to a variety of different industries, including the broadcast industry.
And on that note, shout out to my nephew Patrick, who actually works in our test department, but has also got a lot of training and experience in the field of robotics. So he's done some interesting stuff along those lines as well. And Mark mentioned ArcNet in there, and it's funny you bring ArcNet up because, I mean, then we go into the BBS services and things like this. And I was making the joke earlier about the acoustic couplers and how you could, or the old Radio Shack computers with the cassette drives, where you could potentially be running. You could grab the wrong box of tapes when you were running out the door to grab your buddies and go out for the weekend, and jump into your buddy's Pontiac Acadian and shove a tape into the dash and hear. Let's see. Shane Tovin says he used to run a BBS out of his bedroom. Well, Shignecto BBS here, so welcome to the club. I guess it would qualify as my bedroom at my mom and dad's house, but it's all, all the same. Let's see. I'm going to take a peek down our list just to see who all we have. Holy smokes, we got a lot of folks here. So let's move ahead a little bit, because this is where we were not too many years ago. I mean, in most of our lifetimes. And oh, look, see, yeah, Alex Hartman had a BBS too. Why am I not surprised?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, this is where we were when I was a teenager, and I took programming on a Microsoft's or a 68,000 processor in college. And like I say, now you look at it, and I mean, just this smartphone, which is currently plugged in because I've already managed to kill the battery once today. But it's, there's more computing power in that thing than NASA had when they launched the first space mission. Things that have changed. And I haven't seen if he's made it in. He usually gets to most of these. If he isn't here, then we'll carry on and credit him where it's due when it comes up. But the Ubiquity Wi-Fi bridges, and Jim, I want to grab you on this one, because at KVSC, you guys were one of the first that I'm aware of to use like a Wi-Fi bridge for an STL.
Yeah. And credit where credit's due on this. Alex Hartman came to me and said, I have an idea. There's this thing that does this thing that I think we could apply to what we need to have at KVSC, because we're working on replacing some things with our STL and expanding out some capabilities, and I needed to get internet where internet doesn't exist. We did that, and then we started piping audio over it with, I think it was a Comrex system at the time, and all of a sudden we built an STL out of Ubiquity gear, and this was early enough that I called, I was doing a presentation for the Public Radio Engineers Conference in Las Vegas about this. So I called the VP of Ubiquity, and I said, hey, we're using this in the broadcast field. Can you give me some information about, this and some ideas about how you see this being used in that area? And they had no idea what I was talking about. It was the idea of using IP as transport was pretty new at the time. And Alex kind of blew some minds with his presentation at PREC that year. We were holding a Ubiquity Rocket M5, if I remember rightly. And so just a little thing was on RF out the end, IP in this end. It was pretty revolutionary at the time. Now this is proven to be as reliable, if not more so, than a lot of other methods that are out there. And especially if you're trying to shoot into a zone that has little to no internet options or network options. So, this went from being a cutting edge technology to being a early adopter. I think we're kind of past the early adopter phase, and this is becoming a lot more standard. In fact, I was telling you earlier, I installed one of these systems here just within the last week for one of the client stations.
And that's one of those things that, I mean, it's something that definitely qualifies as affordable. I mean, even with a local tower climber, you're talking $2,000 end to end, right? With the dishes and all.
Yeah, I'll tell you right now, it's $1,300 for a air fiber M5 plus something. I'm trying to remember the exact, but it was like $1,340 delivered for a device that'll give you 500 to 800 meg between point to point. We'll go 20 miles easily, not necessarily
Mhm.
at those speeds. We were shooting about 4 miles and getting about that. I have another client that's shooting about 7 miles and is getting in the upper 500s. So I
Yeah.
mean, you can get. I always joke that I'm telling them I've got better service between the studio and the transmitter site than you do from your computer on your desk to your printer.
Oh,
You
I can
know?
guarantee that.
Yeah.
Well, and I mean, out here for us, and it's something we'll talk about in a bit. I was joking earlier about STL path that I was shooting, and for us, we can't do wireless, so we had to do fiber. But again, so to date myself a little bit, in my tech school, it would be 84, 85. I wrote a thesis on the use of gallium arsenide lasers as data propagation systems for a fiber optic network. And back then, I mean, that ended up being part of the course syllabus because it was so awesome. And now it's pretty common. It's like I said, for us, our STL is done with dedicated fiber from the studio to the transmitter.
Hmm.
Uh, Let's see. Alan Fowler says that he's got a site that's been running with 2 links using Rocket M5 since 2010. So there
Yeah.
you go. And yeah, back in Madison at the Wisconsin Broadcasters, I want to say 2015 or so, we had a pair of nano beams. We had one at the Nautel booth and one at the BGS booth, and we had to aim them away from each other because they were overdriving. The signal was so strong.
Hmm.
But yeah, it's really, really cool. And this leads to something that, and I'm going to steal this slide. It's from a presentation or a session that we did with Kirk Harnack a while back on STLs and emergency backups. And this was just an example of using, whatever means necessary to get from over here to over there. And like I said, in my situation, we have dedicated fiber. We can run over cable modems. We can run, well, in our case, we'd have to double hop to use a wireless bridge. But if you've got a good routing system, then you can put up a whole bunch of parallel paths with fairly automated switching, yeah?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it depends on the cost benefit of other means. There are a couple of cases where we're looking at it be a double or triple hop to try and get to some places because of terrain or other factors. And sometimes you're like, well, maybe we can shotgun a couple of other internet providers together or use technology like Max Connect
Mhm.
as either the primary or as a backup or as part of a dual system, melded system, something like that. But there's lots of different paths to get there. But at the end of the day, it's network, it's all IP. And with so many things on both ends, from the transmitter to the studio systems talking over IP, it's actually more seamless to keep it IP all the way through instead of having to have something that's going to dump it over to a 950 megahertz STL at some point and shoot it
Right.
over there and catch it and reinvent the network on the other end. And it gets really messy at that point. So keeping it actually all in the same IP scheme makes sense.
Right. And I mean, this goes back to, you remember in the older days when I hesitate to say older days, but in the communications industry, yeah. But when we used to worry about A to D converters and D to A converters,
Oh
and
yeah,
now it's, do we convert it from IP to audio, or do we just leave it in the IP until the bitter end, so to speak?
yeah.
Um, so yeah, that's absolutely viable. It's funny that you mentioned Max Connect. As of today, we added the Max Connect group as one of our resellers. And
Hmm.
so if you're looking for a transmitter in the upper eastern part of the Midwest, and Optimized Media, you guys have done some stuff with this too. So
Yeah, absolutely.
bitter
We
self plug
we've
there.
we've been putting Nautels all over the place around here.
So actually, I'm going to skip this slide for a moment. The other cool thing about technology, and I'm going to drag Matt in a little bit. So what we've got here in the lower left corner is my office when I'm not doing webinars, and it's nice and sunny. That's the northern version of the Redneck Riviera, if you will, but it's my front deck and my little sunshade and my laptop, and away we go. the cool thing is that with the technology we've got today, I can be looking on transmitters, taking tech calls, writing quotes, doing whatever from wherever I happen to be. And Matt, that's something that you spend a lot of time playing the how do customers use our gear game.
Yep. Yeah. So obviously, as you've been talking about, with the IP connectivity everywhere, the AUI has blazed that trail for many years now, and puts a really amazing remote control system right in your desktop wherever you might be. And yeah, that's obviously been something that people have relied on pretty heavily.
Now, I'm going to put you on the spot because you do have the product manager shirt on as well, and because I absolutely can. And Andy Lowe makes a really good point. The downside is that everybody assumes that you can do anything from anywhere with just a call from the cell phone. So it is kind of a double-edged sword because, I mean, for us, for example, with the office, we do some pretty hefty security. So I've got to be able to get into the VPN, and I've got to be able to do it with a specific VPN client that doesn't play well on my cell phone. But yeah, I mean, there is some assumption of accessibility. So you do almost have to set some guidelines or and Jim, you must run into this a lot, especially where you wear so many different hats. How do you draw the line? Like, this is university time, this is OMG time. Oh, I have a family. Maybe they'd like some time.
I have my family get with my scheduling people, and so we see what we can work out. No, it is a lot of balancing, and it's also an awful lot of um, prioritizing, but it's prioritizing on the fly. I'm lucky enough to have a work environment at the university that's flexible enough so that should one of my clients call, for example, yesterday we had over 100 degrees at one of their sites, and they had a fax 20 that was in meltdown mode. So I had to kind of drop what I was doing and go take care of that and help that client out. And then come back to the office late at night, and continue on with my the rest of my to-do list. So I mean, it's if you've got flexibility, you can make it work.
Right. And that, I think, is the big key. And it's one of those things that I tell folks, people are like, you must be going crazy being off the road with COVID and everything. And it's like, the funny thing is that now I work from home full time, and it's actually given me the flexibility to do stuff like my little Riviera, if you will. And it's like middle of the day, oh, let's throw up a stun shade and move everything outside. But definitely you've got to be able to, I guess, change and adapt more than anything. And I think that the technology that describes, I mean, you look at like 40 years ago, it was all tubes, and now you still see them, especially for FM, but they're a lot less common. Let's see, I'm just looking. There is a good question, and this ties into this. In the advanced questions, Joshua Titris had asked, what is the best way to disconnect during vacation? Now, my
Uh,
first question is, what's a vacation?
Honestly, the only way I've ever disconnected in a vacation is where I'm in a location that is physically unable to be contacted, and even my anxiety just goes through the roof because I
But
have
it's
no
getting
idea.
smaller and smaller.
Yeah,
There are
I
less
have
and
no
less
idea what's
places.
going on.
Yeah.
Yeah,
I'm from extreme northern Minnesota, where that's the land that technology forgot. So when I go visit my parents, I'm disconnected by default because that's it. Um,
same.
but nonetheless, it's very difficult. I need to find a way of doing more of it. But as I said, it creates such anxiety for me to know that I have so many stations and clients that might need a thing, and I have the answer, and I need this thing to work, and
Yeah,
it's tough. I try and offload and schedule people, tell people I'm going to be off the grid for a while, so I know that if they are going to try and find me, it is probably an emergency. And that's about as close to working it out as I can. But I know I need more.
yeah. Shane Toven made a comment, and I'm going to unmute Shane, and this ties in very well to something that I that I go along with as well. So Shane, there you go. I see you're green now. But you'd mentioned the coming back to 180 emails.
Yeah, can you guys hear me okay?
You're
Mhm.
good.
All right, great. Yeah, I for one time, you know, for once, I actually did disconnect during a vacation at the strong encouragement of my boss. So the problem with that is that when I came back, I had, I was really diligent. I didn't check into anything. I had signed out of my Teams. I had signed out of Outlook. I had signed out of everything on my phone and didn't open my laptop once. But when I came back, enabled that account on my phone, suddenly I had 180 emails in my inbox to wade through.
Yeah.
And yeah, a lot of them didn't really require any particular action or just a quick response, or they'd already been dealt with. But still, I mean, it's kind of the pay me now or pay me later thing with that in
Yeah.
my mind. So
Well, and that's what I almost looked at it. My challenge is that number one, and it's what Jim said. You're worried about those things. Your stress level goes way up. So what I tend to do is when I took a week off, end of April, end of May, I forget, not fairly recently, and it was a staycation, didn't go anywhere. But what I did was the email only got checked for an hour every morning, and that
yep,
was it. And so, it just made me feel, yeah, it let me deal with the urgent stuff without having to panic about
yeah.
whether,
I mean, I'm blessed to have some absolutely wonderful colleagues who can generally handle things while I'm away. I mean, it's nice to to finally come to that realization. Hey, be in that position where you can realize there isn't anything that I exclusively need to deal with.
right. Yeah. And so while we're on this screen, I'm going to flip back over and thanks, Shane. That was true enough. It's like I said, I don't know that I've ever totally disconnected. At some point I will. It'll either be dead or retired. But I'll worry about that when I get there. Matt, I wanted to grab you for a second. And like I said, I warned you earlier I was going to throw you under the bus. But one of our advanced questions, and that's where I was going with this, was whether we're going to see a replacement for the AUI.
For the Flash AUI, yes.
Yes, thank you.
Absolutely. And as everyone can tell, it's taken a little longer than we intended. We intended it to be out in the wild a long, long time ago. But the reality is that there are three layers. There's the operating system, the middleware, and then the user interface. The coding for all of those layers, which we are replacing. So when you do the upgrade, you're going to replace that entire stack on your transmitter. So the coding for all of that's been done. And so now it's the plumbing that makes the top talk to the bottom and sideways and all that kind of stuff. So I've got a VS here in my home office, stuck to the wall as it turned out. And that one's been through a bunch of different alpha builds, and it looks great. I mean, it's if anyone saw the early demos, it really just hasn't changed much, so that coding was done that long ago, and so it's like, well, aren't you done yet? Well, no, because the plumbing part is the hard part, and
Right.
and doing this first one is really the trickiest, and so the other ones will follow through. So we hope to have the alpha one done pretty soon, and I tried another build last night. So it's at 10 o'clock at night, I'm sitting here with USB keys and doing this, and so I get to see a new build. It's exciting, but at the same time, it's still not quite there yet.
Yeah.
But the cool thing is that I've run it on my Mac, I've run it on my PC, I've run it on my phone, and it looks really good, and the things that work pretty well, and then the stuff that's not working just isn't working yet. So but all of that uses HTML5, so it's not like you have to go to the store and download an app. You just open your browser and fire it up. And the upside for us has been that we've started at a time where we can take advantage of the latest technologies in JavaScript and HTML5, which really have only come into maturity in the last 4 or 5 years, we're leveraging that stuff to the hilt now. So what we do end up with is actually pretty modern, and the goal is it's kind of, you know, one operating system to rule them all, one middleware to rule them all, one AUI to rule them all. And so all of our transmitters, whether they're the current ones or anything we do in the future, will basically run the same stack. And so from a maintenance point of view, it's actually pretty cool.
So, and just to put this in perspective of the topic of the day, the cool thing about the technology that we're using is that we are literally talking ripping out the entire control system from a transmitter, replacing it with something new, with something that you can download off the internet, slap on a USB stick, plug in, and bang, you're done. I mean, as opposed to, you know, I mean, Jim, I know that you've done some work on some of the old glowing state technology, and some of that stuff, getting a new control panel into that can be a challenge.
Yeah, being double jointed is not a bad thing. Yeah, absolutely. And the amount of time that it takes to do something as simple as retune something, you know, or a frequency shift or something like that, or being sent to drive several hundred miles to go look at a thing instead of just pulling out my phone and saying, yeah, we're okay, you know.
And that's one of the things, and Alex mentioned it in the comments, that technology has changed so much. I mean, when the AUI originally came out, HTML5 didn't even exist. And I mean, so Flash was the way to
And
basically.
it was cool. Flash was cool.
Yeah. Oh, yeah,
it
was.
The way,
Well,
you know, it's what games were written in.
It was still stinky, but that's, you know, that's a whole different point.
No. That's it. Millions and millions and millions of games out there, and they still run. You know, they have Flash servers that will let you continue to play those games because they were cool. I'm not necessarily a fan, but I respect it for what it was.
Now, remember, I grew up on Oregon Trail, so, you know, don't go there. I mean, if you can't do it in DOS, it didn't need to be done. But speaking of technology, Joe, one of the other cool things that is really changed, and Jim was talking earlier about autonomous vehicles, and we're making them sit out in the heat in St. Cloud and sweat. And it's funny because I just grabbed this picture from an RCR Wireless article from 5 years ago, 2016, talking about using drones, and they're talking about replacing tower climbers. And it's funny because the picture I grabbed, Jim's like, oh, I've got that drone.
I literally have it sitting here on the table next to me. So yeah, that's a DJI Inspire, which was one of the kind of dream ships that I always wanted to have one of. They're very expensive at the time. The Inspire 2s are still out there. It's still pretty pricey. But this was like my favorite idea of what to use for a tower inspection, because you can put so many different cameras on the front of this thing, you know, that do amazing things, from thermal scans to super zoom systems and stuff like that. This one actually has a 360-degree spinning camera, so I can look all the way around it, because the gear actually retract up. If you look in the picture there, that's in flight mode. Right now it's in landing mode, so the gear are down, but the gear shift up, and then the camera hangs below it, and you have a full 360-degree view of everything you need to see there. But nice. You know, and the attachments that you can add to these things really add to what you want to do. So you can have a dual camera system. One of the more common ones we see for people doing drone inspections is a dual camera system that has a visual camera and an IR camera mounted right side by side with them. So you can get a picture, a visual picture, and then the heat picture, and then in the software on the screen, you can see either one, or it'll overlay it. So then you can like get a better visual of exactly where is that hotspot. You know, what does that look like?
And I mean, I've beaten this drum a million times, but the little FLIR camera that I use with my cell phone, same thing. It has the two lenses, so you take a picture and then you can scroll up and down, looking between the heat and the visible. It's really neat.
And the zoom capabilities of some of these cameras is absolutely astonishing too. I think it's the Zenmuse X30 or Z30, I think is what it's called. I have one of my colleagues that is flying that on a Matrice 210 and doing some inspections on high-power TV antennas where you have to be back off just a little ways so that the TV signal doesn't overload the GPS antenna on the drone. But he says at just under a quarter of a mile, between a quarter and eighth of a mile away from the tower, he was able to verify that the antenna was installed with grade 8 bolts, not grade 5 bolts. That's how tight you could get zoomed in on that from that safe distance.
Wow.
For most radio, and again, that was for a TV station. For most radio applications, I can park myself right on the nose of a 100 kilowatt antenna without a problem.
Wow.
With modern stuff, I have the first drone that I started using for tower inspections did have a problem with that because the GPS antennas are the weak point in a heavy RF field. You don't lose connection to the controller so much, but you lose control of it because most of these drones are GPS stabilized. So you're flying a point in space. And when you work the controls on your controller, all you're doing is moving what that point in space is, and the drone does what it needs to get into that position, in that orientation. If you lose GPS lock, now you're flying it for realsies. And when you're within a couple of feet to a few inches of big metal something, that can be a problem. So that was a problem with the earlier drones. These days, just about anything, any of the newer technologies don't have that problem with FM power. TV power, it's a little bit different story.
Right. And
I see you've
Zach,
got a couple of my examples up on there, huh?
Yeah, I do. And Zach Nicklin mentions that Z30 is correct. But,
yes, thank you. Zach is on. Hi, Zach. Hey.
Yeah, see, now
okay.
for those listening, Jim does not have visibility of the attendance list like I do. So he gets, he's literally flying blind, so to speak. Now,
right.
this picture is a good example of how things on the ground are not always the same as they appear, so to speak.
Yeah, so I'm going to show you a couple of common things that I find when I check a tower. So when I first started doing this, I had like a menu of services, and drone inspections was one of the services. And if the tower owner said, yes, I want to pay you to go fly my tower, I'd go fly the tower. I have an entirely different approach to this now. When I take on a new client or I go to a new place, the first thing I do as part of my site inspection is I fly the tower. I want to know exactly what's on there, and then I will find a lot of these problems and be able to bring that back to ownership and say, hey, I found a few issues here. Some of which you're going to see on a couple of examples that we have here. So this one, I don't know if you can very easily see it, but if you look at that bottom guy wire that's going away from us, so you can see where the anchor point is. This was in a very windy state. You can see a cornfield underneath it there. And you notice that the wind was actually bowing that in on just the bottom guy line. I was able to spot that from the drone, that it was bowing off to the sides, and they had to get that retentioned, and that one was the worst of them, but that was an example of that. But also look at the condition of the tower itself. Now this is one of two towers that I've got examples of that look fine on the ground, but you get up typically above the tree line, typically 20, 30, 50 feet off the ground, where it's up in the elements a lot more, and the paint is coming off and it's rusted. So this, you walk up to the base of the tower and you hold up the color cards to it, and you're like, yep, this one's good, it'll pass. It will at the base, but you go up the tower and now we have a rusty tower. So there's another example of trying to find some of these problems before they become a problem.
Yeah, because typically it then depends, of course, whether it's a hollow leg or a solid leg tower, but some of these towers, you get a little bit of rust, and it's not very long between that and an issue.
Yes.
Now, some of these pictures, and so I've had the advantage of having the sneak preview of the pictures too, but some of them you look at them and you go, well, that just doesn't look quite the way it should.
Sure. So here's an obvious and a not so obvious problem. So the picture that is on the left that you can see two bays on there, this station was having two problems. One was a whole lot of ISWAR and poor coverage area. And this was pointing away from the road, so you couldn't see that the fact that this had twisted until you got exactly like right at the tower and right underneath the tower and looked up, and you could see that it was kind of twisted off to one side there. So one of the bays had turned in the wind. I went up to take a look at that, but that wasn't explaining why I had so much viswar. And we had to take a much closer look, and I went to the top bay, and I got right on top of it there. I'm probably flying within a foot and a half of the tip of the bay right there, and I took that picture. And pause for a moment and look very carefully at that single bay picture that you see on the right-hand side and see if you can identify what the problem is. And for the record, I believe this is a Bext TFC2K antenna, if I remember rightly. It's their low power FM antenna. There is one obvious thing that sticks out after you realize what's going on, but what I first noticed was if you look at that arm that's coming from the end nearest the tower that's pointing upwards, so this would be in the upper right-hand corner, look at the cap that's on that, and you'll notice that there's a little dot in the center of it. That's a drain hole. The drain hole was facing up. So this antenna was mounted
that way.
Exactly. This antenna was mounted upside down, which I also should have realized, because if you look at it, the split point for the straps also should point down on these antennas. But what I caught was that. So what had happened is over the course of about a year that this antenna had slowly filled with water because the drain holes were facing up. Of course, that does not bode well for your signal. Having a water cooled antenna, I don't know, is that a thing? But nonetheless, so there's an example of finding what the problem was to be able to figure out what the remediation for it is supposed to be.
Now, one little side note, and said when we were doing the little pregame show that we'll segue all over the place, but this is not the sort of thing that I can just grab a drone off Amazon and walk up to a tower and jack it right up there, is it? There's a little more involved.
It is absolutely not. And pardon me while I get on my soapbox for a minute here, because this is a kind of a sore spot for me. There is a lot of steps that you need to go through to be able to legally operate a drone, and it's for very good reasons. You are operating in public airspace. I'm also a Part 61 pilot, aircraft pilot, and I have an awful lot of respect for airspace. And I need to know that you know what your limitations are when you're flying a drone, what you can and can't do, how you get authorizations to do things, safety procedures, all of that. It's very important that you have that. And there's a whole process to it in the United States, and there's some state specific stuff. So I'm going to talk a lot about Minnesota because that's my base of operations. So to start with, when you buy a drone, you have to register it with the FAA. It's cheap, $5, I think, is the fee to register it. It's stupid cheap, but you got to do it. And you have to post that number on the drone, just like you would see on a normal aircraft with its N number in the United States, C number in Canada. But you have to have your drone registered with the FAA. Secondly, you have to be licensed as a commercial drone operator. That's a Part 107 license to the FAA. It's not that difficult to get. It is a bit of a learning curve. I usually like to explain it as it's about 60% of what a private pilot's exam would look like, because it's an awful lot about airspace and flight characteristics and how do you change your flight, flying on a day like today where it's, probably 80% humidity and 95 degrees compared to if I'm flying in the middle of winter, my aircraft is going to fly completely differently. It's going to have different capabilities and stuff like that. So there is a whole lot of stuff that goes into that. So you have to be federally licensed. That is not the end of what it takes to do this. So for example, in Minnesota, you have to be, your company has to be registered as an aviation services provider. So that means I am licensed in the same way as an airport FBO would be, or a aircraft maintenance company would be, or even a flight touring company would be. So I'm an aviation services provider. That's one of the licenses that's required. To get that license, you have to have a massive amount of liability insurance. I believe it's between $2 and $5 million is the minimums. I think $2 million is the minimums for most cases of liability insurance to be able to get that. And then you have to have the staff in order to do the right kind of flight. So I can't just go fly myself. I need a visual observer. So while I'm flying the drone, I have somebody else that is also watching the drone and watching the ground around me, because my eyes are fixated on what's happening with that ship in the air. So in order to do this legally and correct, you have to go through a lot of steps, and it's rather costly. I'll tell you, it cost me like $8,000 or $9,000 just to have the right to be able to fly my drone before I buy the drone. So I mean, it's a pricey operation potentially, but I know then that people that are doing it right are going to know how to fly safely. There are a lot of people that ignore this and go and fly them. I see a lot of tower crews that have drones that they're flying themselves. I see a lot of engineers that have their own little personal drone, and they're operating illegally. And the FAA is absolutely starting to crack down on that. Michigan has kind of become a hotbed of legal action lately with cracking down on illegal drone operations. So be careful about that. And it's not that difficult. It is a little costly, but the investment is going to be returned very quickly in terms of what you can do and the money that you can save by using a drone for doing some of the work that you'd normally have to hire a crew to do.
And that was a good point. Now, having said all that, I mean, somebody who wants to buy one for recreational use and use it at home with their kids in the park,
Mhm.
I mean, as long as they've all observed the flight ceilings and some basic safety guidelines, that's a little different than this.
It's a little different, but it's getting tighter every day. There is the hobbyist classification, and it is slowly kind of being eroded away because almost nobody is flying that type of operation. You know, you're flying in your backyard and you're staying under 50 feet and you never leave your own property. You know, and you're flying the tiny whoop class, the little tiny guys. You know, some of those, yeah, okay, fine, I get it. That shouldn't be a problem. But if you intend on going up into what I'm going to call my airspace, because it's public airspace up there, right? If you're going to bust your little drone up into my airspace, I need to know that you know what you can and can't do. Or if you do need to fly in your area and you happen to be within, 3 miles of an airport or a heliport because there's a hospital near you, or a prison that is near you, or some other form of restricted airspace, I need to know that you know how to fly appropriately and safely. And the FAA is really starting to crack down on that. So the Part 107 license is not that difficult to get. Go get that. And it's not just work like as a job. They always say in the furtherance of commerce. So you know, I can't say, Jeff, you know, you can go fly that thing. I'm not going to pay you for it, but I'm going to use it to, you know, do it for a function for my company. There's no transaction there. It's not commercial, right? No, it's in furtherance of my operation as a company. So yes, there's exceptions. They're getting less, smaller and more restricted every day, though.
Cool. Now, one of the other things, and this is kind of neat, and Matt, I kind of left you by the wayside for a moment or two, but I'll be dragging you back in. Listening and learning. Well, and the cool thing,
this is great.
Well, and for us, where we're coastal like we are, I mean, we've got a pretty booming offshore oil industry. Oil rigs all have helipads. That's the primary means of transport for crews. In our neck of the woods, again, on the coast, we tend to have a few higher end properties which have their own helipads, and that's over and above Life Flight, RCMP, the Mounted Police, etc. So yeah, we probably have as many helicopters in the air around here as we do fixed wing aircraft at any given time.
And it's become enough of an issue that a lot of the major manufacturers like DJI and such have equipped their drones with ADS-B out. So it's broadcasting that it's there so that other pilots know that there's a ship in the air. It's actually kind of humorous. You know, I pay less for an ADS-B system built into my drone. I can buy a whole drone with an ADS-B out for less than it costs to put an ADS-B out on one of my aircraft, you know, for a full-size aircraft. Who knew? The joke is in some of the drone forums that I go into is like, just go buy a little drone that's got an ADS-B out and just set it in the seat next to you. You'll be fine. You know. But no, it's becoming more and more of a safety issue. We are getting into a point of congestion in the air. and safety concerns and stuff. So it's not that difficult to do it right and to do it legal. And I'm torn because I'm trying to promote using drones for more things, but you have to use it appropriately. You have to use it safely. It's not just everybody gets a drone and pops it up into the air and just hope you don't run into things.
Right. Yeah. And that makes sense. And speaking of popping it up, so we're all used to everybody taking the pictures like these of folks flying the towers and looking up, but you almost never see one of somebody taking a drone up and using it to look down. And this was a
Yeah.
really cool example of that.
So as part of my whole site survey, I should actually give you a kind of a brief idea of what I do for a site survey. So I do a 3 columnar flights. So I fly up and down in between the guidelines. And the flight up, I have the camera at a 15-degree up angle, and the flight down, I have a 15-degree down angle. So then I can take that data and put it into a 3D modeling system if I so chose it to give me some modeling information about the tower itself. That's part of what I do for places that want an idea of what their vertical real estate is. So a lot of tower owners have no idea exactly of what's on their tower everywhere and at what level and what space they have to add things, or whose antenna is that? And that thing hasn't been used for 20 years. Can we just take that thing down? Yes, you probably can, But no, part of my whole site survey is a ground survey. So I look down at where the anchor points are at, and then also the top of the transmitter building. And this is an example of an I told you so situation. So this picture was taken almost 2 years ago now. And I told the owner, I said, the roof is in bad shape. I can see several points where it's leaking. I can see where you've blown some of the roofing off. This roof is going to start leaking on you very soon, and you've got a 20 kilowatt transmitter sitting right underneath those holes. Probably better address that. Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. Yeah, we'll get to that. And then I get a frantic phone call here about 3 months ago that said, I see blue sparks coming out of things, and the breakers are all tripped, and yeah, they absolutely destroyed their transmitter because it got precipitation in on it and doused their transmitter. So that was the bad news. The good news is I did put in a brand new Nautel for them here not too long in there, but that was a situation that didn't have to happen. I saw this coming because I stopped and looked at the top of the roof.
Yeah, and that's like I say, it's you get used to the concept of a drone looking at the tower and looking up, if you will, and so the concept of looking down. And I'm gonna give you a chance to give a shout out. You mentioned that you use a separate pair of eyes for this.
Oh yeah. So when we're flying these, sometimes I need to concentrate on flying the aircraft. So we have visual line of sight rules. So while they advertise that yes, this drone has a 5-mile range, you have to be able to keep your eye, keep it in sight. You're not going to see something the size of a small bird in sight 5 miles away. It's just not going to work. But even on a 1,000-foot tower, it's a challenge to see that thing 1,000 feet up. So I'm really focused on flying the aircraft, and I'm focused on my controller and looking at that there. Sometimes I'm not focused on what I'm there to do, which is actually look at the tower. So usually I will have a second set of eyes. Lindsay is on the talk with us right now. She's one of the participants I hear. Quite often I'll throw a VR helmet on her, and so I can unhook the control of the camera and grant control of the camera to the VR helmet. I've done this with Alex as well. So I fly the drone, and I'm getting it into position, and then this is locked into the camera to control the camera. So when I look down, the camera looks down. When I look up, the camera looks up. And when I turn left and right, the camera swings with it. So they'll tell me how to get into position, and I'm watching to make sure I'm not hitting anything. I'm looking at all my sensors because there's all sorts of safety sensors and collision sensors on these things. So I'm watching all of that. They're getting that shot. They're looking at that thing and saying, oh, wait a minute, I think I see something. Can you get a little bit over? No, a little bit over, a little bit over. Okay, great. And they just tap this thing on the side and it takes a picture. So, they can fly the camera direction and everything while I'm focusing on flying the airship.
And the cool thing is, I mean, that's obviously got to make you more efficient because you're operating the equipment safely and they're able to do the, it's like the same with a news crew in a helicopter. I mean, you got one guy running the camera and another guy driving the boat. So,
Yeah.
or the ship, sorry. Yeah, the coastal guy, you know, it's all a boat to me, but
But
until
yeah,
it isn't.
exactly. This one's another example of a tower that looks fine on the bottom and is in not good shape up top. And I only had to go up about 100 feet, 150 feet there. They were also kind of wondering why there's RF noise issues in the area. I think we can see some of that happening in the background here. They're kind of surrounded by these windmills at this wind farm. But again, this is just one of those examples. A lot of my initial scans, I'm not looking for anything. These are things that I find after the fact. So I do a columnar scan up, down 3 times. And then I also do a POI turn. So I do a scan, a circular scan, usually at or right about at the top of the tower with a 30-degree down angle and do a spin around there. And then I go back home and I start analyzing and looking for things. So this is one of the just generic, I'm shooting the whole tower kind of situations. Then if I find something, I'm like, okay, I need to go back and get a better look at that and see if that's really a problem or not.
And that's that's one of the things, again, that it's a whole different viewpoint, and especially when you live and it'll be obviously environmental, but when you live in the Midwest, for example, you get a lot of air blown dirt during certain times of the year. And so yeah, you're quite literally sandblasting the tower from everywhere above the tree line.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
that's good information to know. Now, this one was pretty obvious even to me, and I'm not a skilled observer, but I'm thinking that when your skirt feed standoffs are pointing away from everything, that's probably
Yeah.
not a good sign.
So there's actually 2 things well, 3 things in this picture. One of which you can't see because this was actually a shot that I framed that I took out of a video. Again, this was just a generic scan. This was not one of my point scans. You know, the AM was having some issues and was trying to figure out what was going on there. It was periodically arcing, couldn't figure out what was going on. We found 2 problems that were probably related to one another. The coax was not firmly affixed to the tower and was flopping around and running into the skirt, and it would slam into the skirt. All right. Well, after a number of those times, it worked the standoffs out of the mounts. And if you look at the one that's obviously wrong, you can see that, yeah, indeed, the standoff is not attached to the tower, and that's a problem. But look at the one that's on the right. Notice that the set screw that is supposed to be holding that one in on the side of the tower, the set screw is missing. So what was happening was these things were getting vibrated out until the set screw came out or came loose, and then they were, you know, the next time that flopping line hit it, it would knock it out. And there was actually 3 of these on this tower. But you know, it was kind of one problem that created another problem, and we had one that was just about to be a problem.
So a million years ago, in a whole nother life, I was installing a transmitter in Nome, Alaska, and we got everything up, got it on the air, and everything's beautiful. And we went back and back into town and went to grab a bite to eat, and we're leaving the restaurant and listening to the radio station, of course, in the car, and I'm hearing in the audio, and I looked at the owner and I said, or the GM, and I said, that's an issue. I said, that's the SWR is tripping. And so we drive out to the tower, and as we get a little closer, we get looking, and I said, it looks like one of the skirt feeds is loose. Well, we get a little closer again, and turns out it wasn't a skirt feed, it was a guy wire. And there was a guy wire dangling down the tower and bumping into the skirts. And what had happened, they had just had the crew up, they'd replaced a bunch of insulators, and of course they used compression insulators where you run a wire through and a wire through, and that way if the insulator fails, the wires are pulling against each other. Except that they wired them or hooked them up as expansion insulators, and when the expansion, you know, so they were not looped through each other, and when the insulator failed, they pulled apart. That's something that if there had been somebody there to do a drone inspection as soon as the tower crew came down, they would have seen something like that almost immediately.
You know,
So
you bring up a good point there too, Jeff. Whenever I have a tower crew on a tower, especially when we're doing like a major job, you know, putting up a new antenna or something like that, I always scan the tower again before the tower crew leaves. And that is for two reasons. One is this is my proof of as built. This is how it was when it was left. And then I have something for the GM or the owner of this is the current condition of your tower now, and I have something for if I find a problem after the fact, that may have been caused by the tower crew. I have something to go back on and look at. This is how
yeah,
you left that. And a lot of
right.
times, you know, if I'm not looking for that kind of situation, I may not find it. You know,
Mhm.
but at the same time, if I scan it and then I have a problem, I can go back and find out where it came from. You
Right.
know.
And now, when you do this, do you keep video recordings of what you're seeing?
Yes, so I have a lot of stored media. Um, you know the camera on these things is incredible. I mean, I'm shooting in 4K, so
Mhm.
I'm getting 4K video, and depending on the drone that I use, it's either 4K 30 or 4K 60. So I mean, there is a ton of stuff on this, and so when I shoot something, I want to be able to zoom in on it and be able to still see pretty well. And then I've got a lot of still photos that go along with it, and I keep that pretty much in perpetuity for as long as they're a client.
Yeah. Oh, and then occasionally you'll see something and you look and you go, okay, so I looked at this and then I looked at this and then I looked tell me the story.
So this is a tower that the running joke was that this station was cursed. It was getting hit by lightning several times a year and causing damage to the two transmitters that were on it. It had an AM and an FM on it. You can see the top bay of the FM sitting there. And um, they had done so many different things to try and mitigate lightning strikes. And one of the things that they did was they moved the light down so you can see that it's got the plate that would normally mount on top of the tower. It's now down on the side. It's on an L bracket there. And then they put dissipators up, but they put the dissipators up like 2 feet down from the top of the tower under the light, with no rod up. And what do you know? None of this worked, and it continued to get struck by lightning until the station is no more. So this tower is actually no longer existing. It's now down on the ground.
Right.
The station has moved on. But this was one of the problems that I pointed out. I'm like, man, you know, of course you're getting some lightning problems because you really don't have the appropriate, lightning, not so much lightning arrestor, but lightning avoidance
Yeah.
situation that you could. I mean, there's a lot better ways of doing this. I
It's
have
one
all
of those,
sorts of other
this is
stories that we
not
found in
optimum.
this.
Yeah.
Yeah, we also found those same exact dissipators mounted to the ceiling on the inside of the transmitter building. There was like 10 or 15 of them. I have no
Nice.
idea what they were doing on the ceiling of the inside of the transmitter building.
Well, now, so I've been in a transmitter room when ball lightning happened, and if they helped against that, it would save you some definite underwear change of moments. Alex
Sure
makes
enough.
a good point. From the peanut gallery, from the ground, you wouldn't even know this because the perspective fools your brain into thinking it's normal.
Yeah, yeah,
So
absolutely.
definitely, and this is one of those situations where being the set of eyes that can, get all the way up the tower is really useful. And this one made me chuckle a little bit too.
So this actually happened completely on accident. So, and here's one of those times people are like, "Great, you can put a drone up there and tell me what the problem is, but I still have to call a tower crew to go fix it." You know, and sometimes that's true. But here's a scenario where this is a client on a tower that was not part of my client, but I had to be out there to shut down the high power FM that was on it and monitor stuff. While they were doing the work. And I'm out there, I'm like, you know what? I've already had some pictures of this tower. I'm going to run a scan while I'm here. So they were already halfway into replacing an antenna, and it's actually that antenna that's on the upper right-hand corner. And they figured that they got hit by lightning. They had it showed up from the ground. It showed open, and they figured that they probably smoked it because it was on the very top of the tower and stuff. And okay, so they bought a brand new antenna, and they had a 3-person tower crew come out because they're going to have to hoist that antenna up there, so they had to rig the tower. And you know, it wound up costing them about $5,000 in total at the end of the day between the equipment and the people to do it. Well, while the antenna that they had just bought was about 2/3 of the way up, I decided to take this flight, and I looked at that antenna that's up there in the upper right-hand corner, and you might notice something missing. There is no coax attached to it, and in
It's an
fact,
air
if you look,
gap.
it's an air gap, yes, very reliable. But you also notice that there is, you can see the line that should be going to it dangling there. It had simply just wiggled loose. And to prove the point, they went up there, they just grabbed that line, screwed it back on, tested it, and it tested fine. They already had the new antenna up there. The company opted to just replace the antenna anyway because they were there, and they had the new antenna. But you know, he's sitting on the ground going, you know what? I could have had a 1-person crew climb up there and reattach that instead of having to spend the money on a new antenna and a larger crew and a bigger operation. If they would have just had somebody with a drone to go up there and take a quick look.
Yep, exactly. Now we're hitting the top of the hour. As always, I've never finished one of these on time. I see no reason to start now. But Matt, I wanted to drag you back in because there was one other cool thing, and we were talking about technology. And I know we've recently started shipping a new controller in some of our boxes, and it's doing some new and shiny stuff. And some of it you can talk about, some of it you can't.
Right.
But what can you let us know?
So in our GVs, we've got a new SBC. So basically, we have a single board computer, a computer that sits inside the transmitter. And in the days gone by, when we put an SBC in there, we would just build it to, you know, whatever was available, and it would do the minimum. And as those parts become obsolete or close to obsolete, it gives us the pause to think about what else could we do with that brains inside the transmitter. And so we kind of asked ourselves, you know, what if we put something with a little more horsepower in there? And so that's what we're doing, and we're replacing the SBC with something a little more horsepower. And so we'll be so not only do we get to have a GV that continues to run and be very powerful, but we now have some additional leftover horsepower that we will be able to add new capabilities to inside the box as opposed to outside the box. And that's probably as much as I can say at this point. There's also a couple of questions on the AUI in terms of ETA, and I thought before we wrap up, I should at least do the honors to reply to that question. So the hope is that we will have a beta going out in the next month or so, and you've heard me say those exact same words in the past, I know, and so I'm just getting more optimistic about that being the truth, and so that's the hope. And so probably by the middle of summer, we'll have the VS series out there as a released product. If everything goes well, if you guys find lots of bugs and things like that, then we got to fix them. In the end, our goal is a high quality release that you can depend on. And then the other ones will be, our expectations they'll be much quicker because we'll have done the heavy lifting of that first release, which is actually why we chose the VS series, because we got so many people with using many of those as backups. So to run a beta program with such a really great pool of volunteers who want to run the beta is pretty excellent for us. Whereas with GVs, yeah, it might be a little tricky to have the kind of pool that we needed for all that testing. So,
Right.
but we're excited about the release. So.
Now, a couple other questions came in while we were talking about the new SBC. William, Marco, and I'll hit those two first, asking whether this would apply to NV and NX transmitters as well.
I'm going to say I think so. Because I think they share the same guts, and so I anything that's become obsolete, we got to replace it. So I think there's going to be a field kit for it, and
Now I'll quantify that because I know the NX series has gone through at least 2 SBC replacements now, and one of them at least required a pretty significant field upgrade.
right,
So by all means, talk to the support team about that, because
for
I
sure.
see Alex has said in the background that yes, it does.
There you
So
go.
so yeah. Now, I mean, granted, it's not, it's not a no charge upgrade because we're taking something that works and just replacing it with something that we think will be better based on supply availability.
Right.
But it is something that you could opt to do if you chose to.
Yeah, the expectation is it's to fix things get broke, and also to make sure the new stuff going out the door continues has something that works. And
Yeah.
but if you see if we add functionality that you actually really like and know that the old one can't do this, then that'll be a reason for a voluntary upgrade, if you like.
Right. And that's something that Alan had asked when we started putting it in, and for the GVs, because and I can answer that because the first one is still in the test room.
Right.
And I know this because it's one of my customers, and I was growling about it being a little late, and they said, well, this is why. And I said, oh, shiny stuff. Okay. So, yeah, I know Alex. Alex is correcting me in the background. Hush. So anyway, on that note, we are 7 minutes past. This archive, or this webinar rather, as with all of our webinars, now see Alex has got me all flustered. The first time I've ever, well, no, second or third time I've been tongue-tied, but it doesn't happen often. So absolutely, you can go to our website under the resources tab, hit the link for webinars. You can go to our YouTube channel, find it there. Other cool thing about the YouTube channel, and you can get to them from the support section of our website, is we have these little how-to videos. The support folks, if there's something that they see that they're getting a lot of calls about, they will occasionally do a little helpful video on showing you how to do it. Things like when we had this discussion recently online, putting the rack rails together for a VS transmitter.
And then we create actual specific lists of videos, so you can watch a GV list or a how-to list or whatever.
Yeah, we use reference tags for all of that stuff.
Yeah.
So on that note, we've also got the Waves newsletter. There will be a new one coming out. I know Fiona is after me to get my article done for it, ideally today. So I guess I've got my afternoon planned. And then other online info, Broadcaster's Desktop Resource. Barry does his weekly lunch webinar. The broadcastengineering.info. Chris Tarr was in for our mentoring webinar not too long ago. So many resources. Absolutely. Thank you, Jim Gray, for taking time. I know I really messed with your schedule with time zones today. So
That's a thing. That's all right.
hey, look, as many things as you're juggling, I'm just glad you were able to spend some time with us today. So thank you very much for that.
Thank you.
And Matt Herdon, thank you as always for graciously accepting to appear when you
You're
know
welcome.
that I'm going to throw you under the bus and make things difficult.
I think I'm looking forward to the next time.
Okay, already.
And I mean that sincerely. Yeah.
Yeah, you're hoping that the next time is the one where you say, hey, guess what? We're shipping this.
Exactly.
You and me both, boss. You and me both. So on that note, folks, it is 10 minutes past the top of the hour, my normal finishing time. I want to thank you all for taking time out of your day to be with us, and we'll see you next time. Have a good day, all. Bye now.
See ya.